to Anita Parsa. Hi, everybody. I cannot see anyone out there. Feels really weird. Hey, so I wish I had known about you all a year ago, because it would have made this process a lot easier, because when I got some of the information I got during this process, I really didn't know where to go. I didn't know you all were here in Kansas City. My name's Anita. I just sort of stumbled into looking into Crosscheck because I read an article back in 2016 when everybody in the world is kind of worried about Russians trying to hack our voter databases. Did they interfere with the results of the election? Yada, yada, yada. I wandered across an article that was about a Kansas program called Crosscheck. It's run out of Kansas, paid for by Kansas, run by our Secretary of State, Chris Kobach. The idea of the program is they take voter data from however many states want to send it. At its peak, it was about 30. Put it all in a big database and supposedly look for duplicate registrants and double voters, which was Chris's, main passion. So the complaint in this article that I read was about how Crosscheck is a voter suppression tool. It's this massive thing to prevent people from voting, specifically aimed at people of color. There were some things about that article that were wrong, but what caught my interest was Kansas is paying for this thing for free. And we're broke. We're not particularly good at data security in terms of the Kansas government. I don't know if you guys know this, but in the Kansas House and Senate combined, there are 2 guys, both in their 60s, who have any kind of tech experience whatsoever. They're former programmers. So we really don't know what we're doing in terms of data analytics, data security, or whatever. So I started looking into it just to see, what's going on with this article, why are we paying for it? As it evolved, I realized that I was asking the wrong question. My first question was, why are we paying so much for this? When I realized the data analytics look like this. They take this database of 100 million American voters with social security number and everything, and they say, you're a match if you have the same first name, last name, and full date of birth. They completely ignore social security number. So every John Smith in the country has somebody else who shares his date of birth. What finally occurred to me is the same geniuses who decided that that was a match designed the data security for the 100 million voter database. So I started digging into what kind of data liability insurance we have. Is Kansas liable if this thing is hacked? I shot off an email to the Kansas Secretary of State's office, a Kansas open record request, back in April of 2017, and I asked him 2 questions. I asked him, how much do we pay for this? How much did we pay to design the program? And how much do we pay every year to run it? And the second question was, what's our data liability coverage like? As is common with the Secretary of State's office, I got no response until, I don't know, December. So 8 months later, and by then it was irrelevant because a whole lot happened in between. I started studying another program called ERIC, Electronic Registration Information Center. They had like a $2 or $3 million startup budget to develop good data analytics and good data security. So, I realized either Kansas is spending way more than Kansas should be spending for a program that we provide free, or we're doing a really, really bad job. Guess which one it was?
We're doing a bad job!
Fucking awful. So I was kind of poking around. I confirmed that Kansas was liable, but I really didn't have any evidence, and I didn't know how to get it. But I sent a Freedom of Information request to the state of Florida because they joined the program in 2013 and they pretty much immediately dropped out. They said it's terrible, the data's unreliable. So I sent them this request. I really just wanted their email correspondence between the Secretary of State's office in Kansas and Florida just to see if they said anything horribly damning about the program that I could use to convince people how awful it was. And I didn't get anything like that, but what I did get was way better. What are you doing?
Speaking about awful, we have a long time tradition here at SecKC, and here's an awful shot.
What is it?
Red Bull and Jaeger.
I don't need to sleep tonight.
Hell yeah.
That was disgusting. I can't even remember what I was talking about. I'm drunk already. Okay, so I get these files back from Florida. Now, I was a programmer back in the 80s. Pre-internet, COBOL, exactly, COBOL. And my tech experience expired somewhere around 1989 when I left it to get my MBA in marketing. So you guys, I don't know the tech part of what we discovered, but I knew enough to know it was really, really bad. So they sent me two things. The first was an email attachment that includes all the private data for 945 Kansans, just as an email attachment. First name, last name, date of birth, their address, social security number, all of it. Somebody got their hand up to ask a question?
Can I have a copy of that?
Yeah, sure. Exactly. So it's not encrypted, there's no password, it's nothing. It's just an email attachment they sent me. Kansas had sent that to Florida in 2013, where it sat in their email until 2017 when they sent it to me. Supposedly all 945 people were double voters, but given how great Crosscheck is, guess how many of them were? Zero, not one. Every last one of them's a false positive because Florida didn't provide their social security number to the system, so every last one of them was a mismatch on social. It was just a bunch of John Smiths and David Smiths and whatnot. So I saw that and I realized that not only was there a risk when they're transmitting the data from the state of origin to Kansas to build the database, and then back to the state, but what they do with it afterwards continues to put all the voters at risk. And again, we're talking about 110 million people who were thrown into this system. So that file, a couple things happened. It confirmed my hypothesis that Kansas was in a world of hurt if this thing got hacked, because Florida got in trouble for sending me the file. Once I finally got the press to write about it, got it covered, Florida copped to the fact that yes, they had done it. It cost them about $100,000 for 945, the release of 945 voters' data.
So you can't have it for $100,000. I want it for free.
Yeah, no, I'm not giving it to you, and I did not bring my computer here tonight sitting out in my car and protected. Fuck. Anyway. Okay, anyway, maybe I should not be talking about information security right now. Anyway, so we got the data to the press, they released it, Florida admitted they screwed up, they paid these people for their LifeLock or whatever. Kansas said, had nothing to do with Crosscheck, wasn't a hack, it wasn't Kansas' fault, it was Florida's fault. So no responsibility. In no way did they say, oh yeah, we have this responsibility. We're taking control of private data for 100 million people. We really ought to have our act together. No, they suck. So it was Crosscheck data. It was an excerpt from the file. It came from Kansas. And you can quibble about the definition of a hack, but it was data that should not have been released to the public, and it was. So I don't care what you call it, it shouldn't have been out. So the ACLU has now filed suit against Chris Kobach about this release of data. We're hoping to make it a class action suit. So on a Saturday night, I'm calling some guy from the file like, hey, this is kind of weird, but like I've got your social and can I explain to you? He's a neighbor of mine. He knows some people we know. So he's the named guy in the suit. It's Scott Moore, really nice guy. I've never met him, but he agreed to participate in this thing. So that's one thing that happened that I got in that Freedom of Information Act. The other thing was, so they emailed the encryption password over plain text email, not only to the states participating, but to like 40 or 50 other people. Now, the one I got was the 2013 one, so there's nothing I could do with it, but it certainly suggested how sloppy they are, right? Terrible. So I wasn't sure what to do next, but in the intervening months, since I had been looking at Crosscheck, Kobach had been named the chair of that bogus crap-ass Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity, which was really his search for 3 million fraudulent voters so that we could claim that Trump had won the popular vote.
Mexicans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and Kobach did his normal masterful performance on that commission, and it disbanded within 6 months under a fire of lawsuits. But the good thing that happened was because he was named and he asked every state for all their private data, and nearly every state said, fuck you, and didn't send it, it raised a lot of attention on the fact that Kobach was running Crosscheck and already getting data. I spent about 2 days and like 7 million tweets. Everybody who was complaining like, no way should my state send data, I would say they're already sending it and they have been for a decade. No one knows this is happening. This whole Crosscheck thing is like completely not transparent. There's no reporting, there's no public accountability. It happens like in a little back room, you know, in the Secretary of State's office. Half of the 90% of the Kansas state legislators that I talked to had never even heard of it. When I called them up, like, hey, I'm worried about this Crosscheck thing and like it could bankrupt Kansas, they're like, what? The what? So we get the encryption password. I don't know what to do with it. The Integrity Commission has created a lot of kerfluffle. So some guys in Illinois also started saying, why are we sending this data to Crosscheck? And they were separately from me working on trying to bring the thing down. So I joined forces with them. So I'm on a conference call with them and I tell them, I've got this file and I got the encryption password and what do we do with this? Because they were back on, remember I told you about the original article and it was all about voter suppression and racial bias, and not that that's not important, but it doesn't open a lot of doors of the Republicans who are making the decisions in Topeka. And so I said, I think there's a lot more power in the narrative of they're really playing fast and loose with this data than there is in trying to prove this voter suppression thing. We have no evidence that's even happening, and in fact, I don't think it is. So these guys are like, you got the encryption password? Yeah. So the next day, a whole lot of Freedom of Information Act requests drop to a bunch of states that are involved. And within like 2 weeks, we have the encryption passwords for every year. We have the IP address. We have evidence that the FTP server they've been using for this, that for years, for a decade, they've been calling a secure FTP, is in fact not a secure FTP. They're sending all of this stuff over plain text email to like 80 people when it should be maybe 30. And they've basically done everything except, you know, hand the information to hackers. And again, this is 110, I think at its peak it was 109 million Americans' information managed by Kansas. So, I mean, it's so dumb. So, and this is when it would have been great to know you guys existed, because we were like, yeah, now what do we do? Luckily, the guys in Illinois knew some people, and they got a hold of Del Cameron at Gizmodo. And Dell got in touch with 3 or 4 white hat hackers who looked at all of this. And I don't know if any of you guys read the article, it came out in November of last year, that said that his bogus voter fraud program could have been hacked by a novice. So, come January 2018, where I started going up to Topeka to meet, to sit in on House Election Committee meetings. And for the first time ever, Kobach has called in front of the House Election Committee to kind of answer these questions about Crosscheck, what's going on. The states, meanwhile, who are involved got scared because they all heard about this and they're like, why are we sending our data to this guy? He can't keep it safe. There's no attempt to keep it safe. So in January in Topeka, I'm in the room when Kobach says, yeah, they say it could have been hacked by a novice, but come on, they didn't hack it. It would have been a felony, first of all. We didn't try to hack it. We tried to show how easy it would be to hack it. I mean, I'm pretty sure somebody could if they wanted to.
Oh, yup.
Yeah. So he says, no worries, I'm gonna spend $20,000 and I'm gonna completely revamp the data security to protect this. Does 20,000 sound good? I don't know. Do you guys think that sounds pretty ridiculous to protect 100 million voters' data?
100 hours of work.
What?
Hell no.
Yeah, hell no is what I thought. So, and think about what could be done with this data. Aside from just like stealing people's private data, if you really, really wanted to fuck with an election, and let's say Indiana has a law, and it does, that the only information they need to strip somebody out of their voter database is that they were identified by Crosscheck as a potential duplicate registrant. Remember, that's based on first name, last name, and date of birth. So let's say that somebody got a hold of the Indiana results file and messed with it so that all of the pick your party, whoever you don't want to be able to vote, all the Democrats now look like they're double registered and they get dropped from the vote. You now have made sure that they can't vote and you've manipulated the election.
Or you live in Georgia.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could mess with all sorts of things. You could change somebody's middle initial. Yeah, exactly. So there's all sorts of malfeasance that could happen in addition to identity theft. And, you know, at a more basic level, anything that affects the voting rights of 100 million Americans should not be in the hands of one highly partisan state with no oversight whatsoever, with no ability to protect the data, with no integrity at all. So anyway, Kobach's like, yeah, I'm gonna fix it. Well, he did never fix it. He also never announced to the public that there was a problem in any way. Somehow or another, and I don't know how, DHS got involved and they came in to review what his new data security was gonna be. And 2018 is almost over. They run Crosscheck, I should have said this, they run it once a year between February and April. It never ran this year. It got shut down. But the whole, yeah, exactly. So it didn't affect the midterms at all because we shut it down. But you know, that son of a bitch, sorry if anybody loves Kobach, but he never admitted that it didn't run. He never admitted that he screwed it up. He never admitted the problems in any way. It was all like, oh, he said literally, I don't concede that there's a problem. Whatever. He couldn't run it. He said, I'm gonna take this program under my wing. And you know, a couple years later, 8 states had dropped out because the data is terrible. Another couple states said they aren't going to send any data anymore because he can't keep it safe. So here we are. We did not elect Brian McClendon as Secretary of State, which would have fixed all of this. Instead, Kansas elected Scott Schwab, who vows he's going to continue Crosscheck the way Kobach did. We don't know if he's going to be able to. We don't know if states will send the data. We don't know if he has the money to fix the election, data security to protect the data. We really don't know what's going to happen next year. What we do know is we have the opportunity with different leadership at the top in Kansas. Like, for example, if the governor of Kansas passed an executive order, or wrote an executive order that said, you can't do this unless there is data liability insurance, maybe we could shut it down again in 2019. One thing that happened in 2018 when we were meeting with the Kansas legislature is we got a Republican to write a bill that said to require data liability insurance because we have none. We're covered by the Kansas Tort Fund, which has, I think, $200,000 in it, which would touch, what, a release of like 2,000 names or whatever based on what happened with Florida. The data liability law, it was super simple, that's all it was. This thing has to be protected by insurance coverage. A Kobach crony got a hold of that and pocketed it. It never got heard. So we're still completely unprotected if this program starts up again in 2019. Still just wide open for anybody to attack unless suddenly the same people who designed something where the FTP is not secured and the encryption passwords are being sent all over town, suddenly become experts in data security. Kansas is vulnerable. I think we calculated if the entire file were hacked, we're talking about $1 billion of liability for Kansas, which would bankrupt the state. So we're hoping to shut it down again permanently. Kansas could use this other program called ERIC, which is excellent. Every other state could use this other program. Kansas really has no business running a voter registration database. So, I can't tell you guys a whole lot about the super technical part of what we found, but I can connect you with anybody who is involved in doing the analysis, and I can, point you to the details and the data on our websites. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer them either up here or back over there, but I will not do any more shots. My website is leavecrosscheck.com, and the guys out of Illinois did endcrosscheck.com. They've got all the tech data on there. So endcrosscheck.com is the one you want for the tech stuff. And then one of the hackers we used is a guy named Adriel DeSantis, I think is his name, Gray Brimstone on Twitter. And he's a great guy. Del Cameron at Gizmodo is great. They both have a lot of information about this on their Twitter feeds and stuff.
Give her another hand, guys.